magnific, excellent lunch prepared by our host. And once again, on behalf of the Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian Committee, express our high appreciation to His Majesty, to the government of the Kingdom of Morocco for his hospitality and for receiving or having us here. My name is Anayansi Rodriguez Camejo. I'm the Cuban ambassador to the UN, permanent representative to the UN. This afternoon, I'm the one putting the gender balance in the table, in the podium. I'm only one, but Latin American and Caribbean woman, very strong, then I can make that balance. Okay, then we are ready to continue our conference with the second plenary session, entitled, as you have in the program, The Question of Jerusalem in International Law and Member States' Obligations. I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers, panelists for this afternoon. As in this morning's panel, we will first hear our speakers, and then we will open the floor for questions, comments, general statements for those that would like to also make general statements. I would also like to remind our speaker to stay within the 7-8 minute time limit. I will not go like my colleague, but I really trust you that you will strict to allow from the audience to participate in an interactive dialogue and discussion, which is very important. Then I also remind that all participants are encouraged to use the hashtag on the screen above, Right for Palestine, to promote this conference on the social media, which is also a very good means to expand our discussion and the important information and issues that we are dealing with here. The theme of this second plenary is, as I just told, the question of Jerusalem in international law and member states' obligation, with a first focus on international law provisions applicable to the question of Jerusalem. It is indeed my pleasure to present to you our first speaker this afternoon, Mr. Ziad Abuzayyad, former Minister of State and currently the co-founder, co-editor, and co-publisher of the renowned Palestine-Israel Journal of Politics, as well as an attorney at law. He was a former member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. More importantly, he formed part of the Palestinian negotiating teams in the 1990s. We feel really privileged to have Mr. Abuzayyad with us at this conference, considering his extensive legal background and peace negotiation experience. Please, Mr. Abuzayyad, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the committee for organizing this conference and inviting me. And I would like to thank the Moroccan government for their kind hospitality. Actually, this is the second time I am in this country. The first time was when I was with my colleague Faisal Husseini, and we had a very small meeting together with the late King Hassan at that time. And since then, I felt the warmth and the support of the Moroccan people and the Moroccan royal family and the king. So at this occasion, I would like to extend again our thanks and appreciation to all what they are doing, including hosting this conference and giving us this very nice and kind hospitality, and especially the last lunch you had, which was a wonderful Moroccan traditional dish. To start with my presentation, I will give a very short background. Because of the time limits, I will not read all my presentation. I assume that it will be uploaded on the website and you can see it online. I will try to read some selective paragraphs of my presentation just to give you the general idea which I am trying to put in front of you. First of all, I would say that the primary forum for the creation of public international law is intergovernmental organizations like United Nations through the codification of customary law. The UN develops, creates, and enforces international law on many levels. The General Assembly and the Security Council are the components of the organization that is most involved in lawmaking and legislative activities. The General Assembly has originated much of the existing international legislation, and some of its resolutions are now accepted as customary in international law, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This presentation will examine the legal status of Jerusalem under the international law represented by the legislative role of the United Nations and in the light of the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions and the General Assembly resolutions. Just to have a very short historical background, Jerusalem was founded in 1800 BC, and it was occupied by King David 8 centuries later, destroyed by the Babylonians, and I don't go for all the details, but I would say that it was occupied by the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Arabs, and the Turks, and the British. So my point here is that the major foundation of the relation between the Jews and Jerusalem is coming from being an occupying force. The Jews cannot claim Jerusalem as their Jerusalem because their first existence in Jerusalem was by the force of occupation. Jerusalem is a Canaanite city, it's an Arab city, it's our city, and they were occupiers from 4,000 or 5,000 years. Back to the General Assembly, I would say that the status of Jerusalem is founded in the Resolution 181. The General Assembly Resolution 181 of November 29, 47, known as the Partition Resolution, divided historical Palestine into two states, Jewish and Arab, while Jerusalem was given a special status defined as a corpus separatum, an independent international entity governed under an international system, and this status did not change until this very moment. And here I would ask the organizers to forgive me if I am blunt. I have a very short comment about the name of this conference. This conference says International Conference on the Question of Jerusalem. This is very great with me. It's good. Because they did not say East, they did not say West, they said on Jerusalem. But then I have a problem with the subtitle, because the subtitle says the question of Jerusalem after 50 years of occupation. Because since I believe that the status of Jerusalem, all Jerusalem, is still undefined, and Israel has no sovereignty over West Jerusalem, then it should be 70 years, not 50 years. Because if we say here, after 50 years of occupation, it means that we are talking only about East Jerusalem, and this is not the case. So thank you very much for the headline, for the major title, which is Jerusalem, but with the subtitle, it should be 70 years and not 50 years, because, as I told you, according to the Resolution 181, the status of Jerusalem is not defined yet. So not only East Jerusalem. And here I may tell you a Jewish story that two brothers inherited a piece of land from their father. And when they wanted to speak about the land, the elder one said that all this land belongs to me. The younger one said, no, we are brothers, we inherited this land, it's half for you and half for me. And they went to the rabbi, and the rabbi said, well, there's no problem. The first half is not disputed because the elder one claims that it is for him, and the younger one admits that this is for the elder one. So you, elder one, take the first half. And then we come to the second half, And the second half, the elder ones say that it is for him, and the younger ones say it is for him. So let us divide the second half. And this was what happened with the Palestinians. I'm criticizing myself and my leadership. Because when my leadership started talking only about East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine, the Israelis say, well, this is an Oriental bazaar, so if the Palestinians want East Jerusalem, it is divided with them. So the whole approach of talking about Jerusalem should be talking about Jerusalem, all Jerusalem, and not only East Jerusalem. I go back to my paper. I say the borders of Jerusalem, according to the Resolution 181, included the old city of Jerusalem, its neighborhoods around it, and including Bethlehem and the strip of land leading to Jerusalem. Despite the outbreak of hostilities in 48-49, the United Nations made several attempts to establish the international regime before giving up in 1951 after Israel created its Supreme Court and its Knesset convened in Jerusalem, and there was an armistice agreement between Israel and Jordan, and the city was physically divided. So in 51, the United Nations gave up on its attempts to put Jerusalem again under international supervision. Israel occupation of East Jerusalem since 1948 has not been recognized de jure, and the 1949 Israel Armistice Agreement endorsed the de facto division of the city, but did not affect the legal status of the city of Jerusalem according to Resolution 181, as I mentioned earlier. Israel tried continuously since its creation in 1948 to violate the international status of Jerusalem. In that period, the Israeli authorities established the Israeli Supreme Court and the Knesset, but then there was a complaint to the ad hoc committee which was formed to follow up on Resolution 194, and the UN ad hoc committee addressed the Israeli Prime Minister at that time with a letter that such acts are in violation of the UN General Assembly resolution. Israeli measures to integrate West Jerusalem into Israel and the measures taken by Israel following the occupation of East Jerusalem in June 1967 war to assert sovereignty over all Jerusalem have been repeatedly condemned by the United Nations and are of no legal effect. Israel is a belligerent occupation of East Jerusalem, and under international law, belligerent occupation cannot confer title. The principle of inadmissibility of acquisition of land by force is stated in the UN Resolution 242 from November 22, 67, in regard to the territories occupied in 1967, including East Jerusalem. Therefore, prior to 67, no state moved its embassy to Jerusalem, and the status of the consuls in Jerusalem was as delegated to Jerusalem and not to Israel and not to Jordan. And the ambassadors who were called consul general, but they were on the rank of ambassador, all of them did not submit their credentials neither to the foreign ministry or to the president, but to the governor of the district, and all of them were reporting directly to their governments and have no contacts or relation with the embassy in Tel Aviv or the embassy in Amman. And this situation continued after 67, including the US consulate in Jerusalem, which is until now reporting directly to the State Department, and Ambassador Friedman, who is the ambassador of the Jewish settlers in Israel, he is trying to change this situation and make the Consul General in Jerusalem under the supervision of the American embassy. But lately, there was a clarification from the State Department that this is not on the agenda at this time. After the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian lands of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza Strip, as a result of the 67 war, Israel established its authority over these areas as an occupying force, making substantial geographic and demographic changes by force of military occupation. On the 27th of June 1967, Israel unilaterally extended its jurisdiction and legal constituency over East Jerusalem, including the old city of Jerusalem, expanding the municipal borders of the city to include the surrounding neighborhoods of Sur Bahir, Kalandia, Airport, Jabal al-Mukabbir, and Shafat, in violation of the United Nations Resolution 181 and 242. And on the 29th of June 1967, an Israeli military order was issued dissolving the elected Municipal Council of Arab Jerusalem that was composed of 12 members, and all were exempted of their tasks, and the elected Arab mayor of Jerusalem, Rouhi al-Khatib, was expelled to Jordan. Following the defeat of 1967, some marginal states moved their embassies to Jerusalem, whereas the permanent 5 states represented at the Security Council refrained from doing so based on the political and implications respecting their obligation to the UN Resolution Council, Security Council 181, no, the UN Resolution 181 of 1947. Undoubtedly, the international community represented by the UN Security Council and the many UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions are a proof that throughout the years, it never accepted the Israeli practices that changed the demographic, geographical, and political status of Jerusalem or its legal status by building Jewish settlements or expelling its Arab inhabitants. All these measures were considered illegal. After the Israeli occupation, there were many resolutions taken by the Security Council, including Resolution 242, 2552 of May 68, 267 July 69, 446 in March 79, 465 1980, and 476 June 80, and 478 August 80, and very lately Resolution 2334. All these resolutions share the same substance, which consider all the measures taken by Israel, including building, construction, legislating laws, issuing administrative orders. All these activities are in violation of the Geneva Fourth Convention, of the international law, of the resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly, and all these resolutions are null and void and have no effects on the ground and do not give Israel the right to gain any right in Jerusalem. Furthermore, the UN, I should mention that the United Nations General Assembly approved in its emergency special session that was held on December, the 21st of December 2017, a rejection of all of the Israeli former and present practices and measures that change the legal status of Jerusalem, especially the demographic balance. And it demanded all member states to refrain from opening diplomatic missions in the Holy City in accordance with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 478 of 1980. And it's known that the United Nations General Assembly special emergency sessions have the same legal weight of Article 6 of the United Nations Security Council. Recently, on the 14th of May 2018, the United States of America transferred its embassy to Jerusalem in violation of all the international resolutions, including Resolution 478 of 1980, and the many United Nations Security Council and General Assembly resolutions that prohibit changing the legal status quo of Jerusalem prior to 1967, in a step that contradicts the U.S. claim that it is a fair mediator to achieve peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And this violation comes from a leading country in the world and a permanent member of the Security Council. To conclude, I would say that the status of Jerusalem under the international law is still defined and ruled by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181 as an area of non-sovereignty under international supervision. All laws, administrative regulations, measures legislated, issued or done by Israel by the force of military occupation of Jerusalem are and in violation of UN Charter, Geneva Fourth Convention, and all successive relevant Security Council resolutions. All Israeli measures in the city are null and void. Palestine has a valid claim to sovereignty over the city based on the fact that under the Ottomans and during the British Mandate, Jerusalem was an integral part of the territory of Palestine, and Jerusalem was its administrative capital. Palestinian Arabs were the overwhelming majority of the population until the Jewish immigration alerted the demographic structure of the city. On the other hand, the Israeli claim to sovereignty over Jerusalem has no basis in United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181, since the resolution never envisaged that Jerusalem would form part of the proposed Jewish state, but a corpus separatum subject to international regime. Furthermore, Israel did not claim sovereignty over Jerusalem in the Oslo Declaration of Principles in September 94 and the interim agreement with the PLO, and admitted that Jerusalem is an issue of final status negotiations, whereas its status will be determined through negotiations with the PLO. Jerusalem is, from the international law perspective, an area under international administration until an agreement is agreed upon between Israel and Palestine based upon ending the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian land and guaranteeing the Palestinian national rights in Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine and resolving the Palestinian issue from all its aspects. Finally, a footnote. I have a personal problem with the term Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think that we are forced to use this term, and it's part of the Israeli terminology, because the fact is that there is no Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is Israeli occupation of the Palestinian land. And I wish this term, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to disappear from our terminology and from our language, and we should always focus on the occupation of the Palestinian land and not a conflict. Thank you very much.
Indeed, I thank you, Mr. Abuzayyad, for your valuable presentation that gave us a lot of comprehensive information about the international law provisions which are applicable to the question of Jerusalem, and including your remarks and observations on the title of the conference, which is something that we should think. And I'm very sure that your interventions will encourage a lot of discussions and questions and comments from the audience later on. But right now I will give the floor to the second speaker, to the second panelist, which is Mr. Dimitris Bouris, a political science professor at the University of Amsterdam. Mr. Bouris' research focused on the European Union's external relations and particularly its role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. By the way, this is the note that I have here. Yeah, but you're right. I personally agree with your assessment of the issue. He authored many articles on the subject, and his recent book is The European Union and Occupied Palestinian Territories, a State Building Without a State. Mr. Bouris will speak about the European Union policy and practice vis-à-vis Jerusalem. Please, Mr. Bouris, you have the floor. It's my pleasure to give it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation for inviting me here. It is a great honor and pleasure to be here with you. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start with 3 disclaimers. First of all, I do not represent the EU, and I do not represent Greece, which is my home country. Secondly, I'm a political scientist and not a lawyer. And thirdly, I'm an academic, so please excuse me if I will be a little bit more outspoken and less diplomatic. I would like to start with a little bit of history, very briefly. I prepared this PowerPoint presentation because I knew that this session would be after lunch, so I hope that I can attract your attention and that you will not fall asleep. It's very important to look at the evolution of the EU policy throughout all the decades, and here you have the very key moments in this evolution of how the issue of the occupied land or the issue of the conflict was not even prevalent in the 60s in the official EU documents. And I guess you know better than me that in the 67, the EU was not able to adopt a common position of how to respond to the war. And what you see is that throughout the years, step by step, the first statement in 1973 called for the recognition of the legitimate rights of the Palestinians. 1977, the European community put the idea of a homeland for the Palestinians. The most important probably declaration, the Venice Declaration, 1980, which supported the Palestinian right to self-determination. It went as far as to say that the European community would not accept any unilateral initiative designed to change the status of Jerusalem. And the declaration could also be considered as visionary because it called for the inclusion of the PLO into the negotiations, something which was not mutually agreed by the rest of the international community back then. And then we have the Oslo Accords, we have the Berlin Declaration, where for the first time the EU expressed its readiness to recognize a Palestinian state when appropriate. Of course, the parameters of this appropriateness were never defined. Next declaration specifically mentioning the 1967 borders. And then 2009, the Council conclusions, which put all of these things together. And the EU has now a clear position with regard to all core issues of the conflict. Now, what is worth mentioning is that the initial draft of the 2009 conclusions, which was prepared by the Swedish presidency back then, explicitly mentioned East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state, but you will not see this in the final document for reasons which you probably know better than me. And another important moment, more recent, is 2012, where the European Council expressed that all agreements between the State of Israel and the EU must unequivocally and explicitly indicate their inapplicability to the territories occupied by Israel in 1967, and I'll come back to this. Now, all these are important with regard to Jerusalem because someone can also observe a shift in the EU's policy with regard to Jerusalem, while in the 60s, the community demanded for Israel's withdrawal from East Jerusalem. In the 70s, the Schuman document called for the internationalization of Jerusalem. Then we're moving to the 80s, where the EU says that they will not accept any change to the status of Jerusalem. And from 2000 until today, we have a very explicit mentioning that there should be a division of Jerusalem serving as the capital of both states, Israel and Palestine. And this slide here summarizes the EU positions to the core issues of this conflict. Now, why did I show you this slide? First of all, to demonstrate that it takes time for the EU to do things. It took it 50 years to adopt a clear position. And secondly, also to emphasize that what you get there from the conclusions is usually the least common denominator to which 28 or soon 27 EU member states can agree upon. The EU and the Oslo Accords, you have this picture here. The EU is nowhere to be seen, as you can see. So the Oslo Accords established what Anne Lemur, who is an official of the UN, called the paradigm of the conflict, and I hope I will not insult anyone or offend anyone, where the United States decides, the World Bank leads, the European Union pays, and the United Nations feeds. The EU provided over half the funding needed for the establishment of the first institutions following the 1993 Oslo Accords, and this graph here shows to you that the EU and its member states are behind every aspect of the state-building project conducted in Palestine. Very roughly 500 million euros a year coming from the EU to Palestine for institution building. And this takes me to 2011. You're all familiar with the so-called Fayyad plan about building the future institutions of a future Palestinian state. And these are some of the quotes from the main agencies involved in evaluating this exercise: IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, as well as on behalf of the EU, Catherine Ashton. Back then, she declared that Palestinian institutions compare favorably with those in established states. Now, what happened eventually after everyone recognizing that Palestine has reached the threshold of a state? This is how EU member states voted in the eventual bid in 2012 for the upgrade to a non-member state. And on the left, you can see how EU member states voted in the UNESCO vote in 2011. And on the right, you see the actual vote in 2012. As you can see, a three-way split where the Czech Republic was the only country voting against, with the rest of the EU member states either abstaining or voting in favor. Sometimes the EU can indeed adopt a common position, and this is these are the votes from back in July 2004 on the inquiry of alleged war crimes in Gaza. The EU did adopt a common position, and the common position was to abstain. This takes me to 2013, where the EU came with the so-called guidelines, which say that only Israeli entities having their place of establishment within Israel's pre-1967 borders will be considered eligible for EU funding. Now, the tricky bit with the guidelines is that they cover most of the areas of cooperation between the EU and Israel, but they do not cover trade-related issues. The trade-related issues were tackled by the so-called labeling issue, which came 2 years later than that, which has to do with the labeling of products originating from Israeli settlements. It was an interpretative notice adopted in November 2015 on indication of origins of goods coming from the territories occupied by Israel in 1967. The way I translate all these policies is that what the EU is trying first of all to make sure that it does not conflict its own internal laws, and secondly to delegitimize the occupation and legitimize the state of Israel within the 1967 borders. More recently, we had the so-called French initiative after Kerry's failure to bring a peace plan. The French peace initiative did not go that far, and it failed. And then when it comes to political resistance actions of the EU in Jerusalem, first of all, we have the so-called head of missions reports, which started in 2004, building on the so-called Jerusalem Watch reports. The reports are full of information from the heads of missions of the EU in Jerusalem and Ramallah. The problem with those is that although they provide very helpful information on what is happening on the ground, the problem is that when they arrive in their capitals, I'm not sure to what extent the capitals take them seriously or taking them into consideration. Acts of political resistance, you have definitely seen a lot of them, especially in the last couple of months. And these are some of the tweets of Federica Mogherini, the most important of which is that Netanyahu realized there is full EU unity. The only realistic solution is based on two states with Jerusalem as capital. We want to continue to work with the quartet, with the US, Russia, and the UN. So there is a very clear message from the EU that it will not follow Trump's policies on the ground in Jerusalem. Of course, there are some spoilers. There are traditional spoilers, and there are new spoilers. My own country, one of the recent spoilers, back in 2015, Greece abstained from the UN resolution on raising the flags of non-member observer states. And this was the first time that such a change was observed. And you all might think that Trump, or Mr. Trump, was the first who recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but no, that's not true. The Greek Prime Minister did this, and I've got here the notes, after his visit to the Israeli President Rivlin. It's a great honor to be in your historical capital. This happened in 2015. New spoilers include Austria, Romania, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, which accepted an invitation to attend the reception of the Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs in honor of the US Embassy move. And the latter three also blocked a common EU statement to respond to this move of the American Embassy. And this is the voting of, I think it was almost 2 weeks ago, how EU and EU member states voted on the question of protection of the Palestinian civilian population. None of them voted against, which can be good news on the one hand, but as you can see, most of them either abstained, half of them abstained, and half of them voted in favor. And I'll leave it here, and I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitris, for your informative presentation that, again, gives us a lot of detailed information in order to provide us a space for a very good discussion afterward, particularly on the contribution of the EU and the important role that the EU is called to play in this very important issue. Now I will go to the last but not least speaker, our third panelist, which is Mr. Moshe Amirav, that will be intervening on Israeli non-compliance with international law and Israeli civil society action. Mr. Amirav is a political science professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and an expert on Jerusalem conflict. He is known for his early engagement with the Palestinian Liberation Organization back in 1987 and for taking part in the Camp David negotiations in 2000 in the capacity of advisor to the then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Mr. Amirav most recently authored the book Jerusalem Syndrome, The Palestinian-Israeli Battle for the Holy City. Mr. Amirav is an advocate of the two-state solution with Jerusalem as a shared capital of both states. Thank you, Mr. Amirav, for joining us today. And sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very honored to be invited and speak in this conference, Chairwoman. And you know, I came here actually with a kind of lecture that I teach my students. One of my courses is Jerusalem, the conflict. And I'm, in a way, trying to get to my students. I have one class, which is an international group of all over the world, and another class of Israelis. So I did a few times this time the trick I'm going to do here, that instead of information, a lot of information, I'll just tell you some stories, personal stories about Jerusalem, and you will understand what's happening and what can be reached in peace in the city that is called in the Bible the city of peace. I myself, when I came here, actually I was a little bit shocked when I've heard that there are riots against me, and some people asked the king to put me on trial because of war, as a war criminal, because in 1967 as a paratrooper I conquered Jerusalem in the war. And this is a fact, I can't ignore it. I conquered Jerusalem according to these critics. I liberated Jerusalem according to the Israeli version. But both ways, I was wounded there, and since then, I'm very much involved in the question of Jerusalem, especially trying to find peace to this city that knew more conquerors than any other city in this world. 37 conquerors. I was the last one. And when I came here and I heard about all the what's going on here, I said, okay, I'm not going to give you a very boring, long speech. I'm going to tell you some stories. And the stories I was involved had to do with asking for a solution to this city that we Israelis and you Palestinians love so much. But, you know, we are not the only ones who love this city. This city is so important and so moving to Muslims all over the world, Christians all over the world, Jews all over the world. So it's not only between us Israelis and you Palestinians. Jerusalem, for many, many mothers who tell their children the story of Jerusalem, about the prophet and about Jesus and about King David. This is what moves them to feel that they belong to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is not only yours, the Palestinians. It's not only us, the Israelis. Jerusalem is a city for everybody. And it should be a city of peace. So we ask ourselves, and this is what I asked myself after this war in 1967 as a young wounded paratrooper, how do we bring peace to this city? So beside my academic work in the university, the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, in which I teach, I tried all these years, 50 years, to negotiate together with my colleagues, Palestinians. Here is a colleague of mine. For 50 years, we are trying to bring peace to the city. Me and him, he is a Palestinian. And especially with a very good friend of the two of us, Faisal Husseini. I was sitting with Faisal Husseini, and actually we found a formula for peace in Jerusalem. It's not a secret, I'll tell you the formula. It's the only formula. How do I know that this is the only formula? Because I was very close to Prime Minister Barak in Camp David, and very close to Prime Minister Ehud Olmert in Annapolis a few years later. And these two prime ministers of mine failed to bring peace for me and for my children and for my son. And I called my son's name Iri. In Hebrew, it's my city. I called him on the name of Jerusalem that I love. So what is it and how is it that we didn't reach peace yet in this city? I'll try to tell you a few stories, and you will understand in these stories much more than the information. And that's what I do sometimes with my students. I see that they're so tired. And I tell them a story. So what is this story of me and Faisal Husseini, the late Faisal Husseini? What is it that we came to? And to an understanding between him, a Palestinian, and me, an Israeli. And I was an Israeli in the Likud, right wing in Israel. And he was a PLO. And we came to the conclusion that we can find a solution, and we found it. I went to the Prime Minister, Shamir. at that time. And I said, look, we have a solution to Jerusalem with Faisal Husseini, and Arafat blessed it. And Shamir, the prime minister, said, I'm ready that there will be elections in the Jerusalem, in the West Bank. They will have autonomy, but not with Arafat, not the PLO. And I said, but Mr. Prime Minister, without the PLO, we can't go further. No. He was advocating, you know, peace and arrangements with Hussein, King Hussein, not with the Palestinians. And I said, only with the Palestinians. The end of this negotiation between me and Faisal ended when actually Prime Minister Shamir said to me, stop all the negotiation with Arafat and with the Palestinians. We're not going to for anything, and we continue our rule here in Jerusalem. And I warned him. I said, it will not be this quiet. I'm talking about the 2 months before the first Intifada. If somebody can remember, it was a time of peace. Everybody was happy. It looks like the Palestinians are happy. And he put Faisal in prison, and 2 months later started the Intifada. They changed the Middle East. We could have peace then on the formula, this Husseini Amirav formula. What is this formula? I can put it very shortly in 3 sentences. 2 capitals in 1 city. This is a new idea. Go to Rome and you will see 2 capitals in 1 city. City of peace. Jerusalem is called in the Bible the city of peace. Husseini said, yes, I accept it. We shook hands. Actually, I hugged him. I thought maybe my party, the Likud, will accept it. They didn't. So I left the Likud. And then later on, I was working with Prime Minister Ehud Barak on another experiment to bring peace to my city. And I told my Prime Minister through this negotiation that were in Camp David, I said, Jerusalem is the main issue. If we don't find a solution together with Arafat, together with the Palestinians to Jerusalem, there is no agreement. And the Prime Minister said to me, yes, Professor Amirav, but in order to find a solution to Jerusalem, the Palestinians have to accept 1, 2, 3, 4. I said, bullshit. They will not accept it. We have to go on an even and a just solution. And he said to me, what is the solution? And I said, the solution was written here. Here's the paper. Faisal Husseini and Moshe Amirav signed it. It's an open city. It can be 2 capitals. It could be the city of peace, first time in the history of Jerusalem. And Ehud Barak led this conference the way he thought it will be. And you know, I was only the advisor. I didn't take the resolutions. And in the end of the day, I say to him, the whole conference will fall if we don't find a solution to Jerusalem. All the other subjects are much more easier. And in the end of the day, this is what happened. Whoever wants to know why Camp David failed, the answer is Jerusalem. I had many talks with Chairman Arafat when he was alive, and he made it very clear to me. In the United States, I was in Tunis with him, and he said, Jerusalem, Moshe, this is the #1 question. This is the break it, or the only way to break the situation. If we can get what we want in Jerusalem, the other things will be easy. And if you have the will, there is a way. That's how he used to say. And I believed him. I think he was right. And then later on, I went to speak with Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. He's a friend of mine from the childhood. We were together in the Likud, and then I left the Likud, but we stayed friends, and he was mayor of Jerusalem. And I say to him what I say to Barak. If you don't find with Abu Mazen a solution to Jerusalem, no solution. He said, okay, so what do you say? I told him what I told Barak. And you know the end of the story. The end of the story is that again, Jerusalem was the main obstacle in Annapolis. And in Annapolis, Olmert was almost ready to sign peace with Abu Mazen, with the Palestinians. We were so near peace. Abu Mazen was hesitating. He was hesitating to sign. There were people, Palestinians and Europeans and Israelis, who came to Abu Mazen and said to him, wait, don't sign yet. He's going to jail soon, Mr. Olmert. And that's what happened. They didn't sign it. They were so close. And Olmert went to jail. And then we got Netanyahu. So what I'm trying to say is that through all these years that I am part of this conflict, part of the conflict in terms of trying to make this city a city of peace, so my son will be able to live there in peace. It's the stupidity of Israelis. It is the stupidity of Palestinians who didn't take the chances. So what is the solution? Let me tell you, the solution is so simple. It is the paper I wrote together with Faisal Husseini. He signed it. It's the first time a Palestinian and an Israeli, I mean, both of us, we were not just Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, I had my position near the Prime Minister, and Faisal had his position near Arafat. We could save the second Intifada. We could save thousands of lives of Palestinians and Israelis because of the stupidity of the leaders of the Palestinians and the Israelis. I'm saying it with pain. I'm saying it because this is the truth. I'm not a politician. I don't run to be on any post in Israel. And they know it, the Israelis. I'm saying it because it hurts me that this city, that is called the city of peace, that was conquered so many times, that so much blood was there through history because of stupidity and narrow-minded people. Yes, they were big people, prime ministers, but they couldn't reach the very simple thing, that this is not another city. This is the city. And we can't divide this city. I've heard it from many intellectuals, Palestinians, who say to me, we don't want to divide this city. We want it to be one city. We don't want it to be Berlin. We don't want it to be Nicosia, where they have the wall in Nicosia. Have you ever seen there? I've been there. So we can do it. An open city. We can make it a city of peace, as it is called in the Bible. It's up to us. It's up to us who are sitting in here. I'm saying all this with a lot of respect to the conference here, to all the people who organized it. I have this respect also because, as I said in a paper I gave you, and you have it on the picture, because I'm a refugee. I mean, I'm a son of a refugee. I'm not a refugee anymore. I was for 2 years a refugee with UNRWA, and thanks to UNRWA, I'm here. I'm a professor. I'm a free man in my country. And thanks to UNRWA, maybe, we will see all of us peace in Jerusalem. I'm saying all this because I decided to speak from my heart and not from my brain. I can give you a very, very academic lecture about Jerusalem, about what's happening in the last 50 years, 2,000 years. But in the end of the day, Jerusalem is so emotional. It's emotional for my friends too. Those who sit with me here on the table. He's a good friend of mine. He wrote a few words about my last book, The Jerusalem Syndrome. And I thank him for that. What is my book about? It's about the syndrome, Jerusalem. It's about the craziness of the Jerusalem syndrome. Those who don't know what this syndrome is, it's the syndrome in which you see in the streets of Jerusalem people a little bit crazy, walking, speaking with Jesus Christ. Or they're speaking with God. They stand in the middle of the street and they speak to God. And I'm sure God is listening because this is Jerusalem. We have about 200 cases like this in the hospital every year in Jerusalem. It's called the Jerusalem Syndrome. So I called my book The Jerusalem Syndrome, because I've seen all these crazy people. And I saw in their eyes the syndrome. When I spoke with these prime ministers, with the president of the United States, Clinton, when he spoke to me about Jerusalem, it was not like he was speaking about the West Bank and about security, you know, all the other issues we had in Camp David. He spoke about Jerusalem like a crazy man. He had in his eyes this thing, Jerusalem, Jerusalem is so important. And I said, yes, Mr. President, but practically we have to find an idea that will not divide the city. And everybody here in this conference was speaking about dividing my city. I'm against it. And then I saw it in the eyes of Arafat. I had many talks with Arafat. Not like many Israelis. I appreciate what he did. I think he was a great leader of the Palestinian nation. But when it came to Jerusalem, I spoke with him once in Tunis. He had this Jerusalem syndrome. And I said to him once, you know, I am very much interested in history. And he said, yes, I have a hero. And this hero is the one who conquered Jerusalem many, many years ago. And he saw himself as the liberator, as the one who will liberate Jerusalem. Later on, I told my prime minister, you see, for Arafat, the main important thing is Jerusalem. If we can pass this stone, this block, other things will be easier, much easier. My prime minister said, no, Moshe, you are a little bit exaggerating. He's playing a kind of a game, Arafat. I said, no, 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 he's not playing a game. He really thinks that Jerusalem is number one on the agenda of the Palestinians and will be. So until we have a solution to Jerusalem, all the rest is less important. I agree with him, late Arafat, who I came to appreciate. He did unbelievable things. I'm talking now as a professor. For the Palestinians, there were nothing before he came with his PLO. They were under a kind of a Jordanian rule. And this is what Yitzhak Shamir, Prime Minister, said to me, why do we have to give the Palestinians a state? Why do we have to give them Jerusalem? They should be part and citizens of King Hussein. And I said, no, 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 they will not lose their identity. We Israelis, we Jews, we kept our identity for 2,000 years. The Palestinians will not say, okay, now we are Jordanians. And Arafat, which many Israelis hate, I appreciate his contribution to his people. So to conclude the issue of Jerusalem, I'm saying what I said then with Faisal Husseini. We can live in this city of peace. We don't have to put a wall in it. We can have peace and have two capitals, the capital of Palestine, and I'm sure Palestine will be a free country, a free state, definitely in a few years. And we will have two flags there. And then we have this small area. And by the way, when we speak about measurements, I talk with Israelis. They even don't know what is the size of the old city. Some say 20 square kilometers, some say 10 square kilometers. I don't know if you know. 1 kilometer. Wahad. Bas. 1 kilometer. And when we speak about the other thing, which is much more important, Temple Mount. What is Temple Mount? It's nothing. So why should we fight? Why should we sacrifice so many lives for this place? We can bring peace. When I say we, I mean Israelis and Palestinians. And I believe we can do it. And the formula that Faisal and me, late Faisal, came to, I'm saying it again and again to all my prime ministers. And you Palestinians, you should say to your leaders, it's 2 cities open, 2 flags, and the holy places will be under international or whatever. I'm not getting into the details. And we don't need flags there. The last time there was an Israeli flag on Temple Mount was in June 8. I saw it as a soldier. I saw the paratroopers putting the Israeli flag, and then Moshe Dayan, came and say, take the flag. We don't need flags in Temple Mount. So we don't need flags. There is no flag anymore. We don't need a flag. We need peace in the city of peace. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Amirav, for sharing with us your personal experience and expertise on Jerusalem issue. I think you have gave to us a lot of food for thought. I just want to make a comment about, and you are right, Jerusalem must be the city of peace. At the same time, we have to think that we are talking not about the symmetric or parallel situation. We are talking about a totally asymmetric situation where we have right now, for more than almost 70 years, an occupied people, an occupied land, and occupying power. Then how to get peace in this asymmetric situation is the question that we are discussing, and this conference is also discussing. But thank you very much for your experience and sharing with us your thinking on the issue. Now, in my talking points, I have that now is the moment for recess, but I think now is a good moment to start discussion instead of break. Then we are ready to start discussions, and participants are welcome to ask questions or make comments, even general statements. You can make it during this time. Please introduce themselves, those that you don't have the names in your seat, in order to know who is speaking to the audience. I will give the floor to His Excellency Minister Mohammed Stayed. Please, Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I listened with great interest and emotions to what has been said over this afternoon session. Jerusalem is the issue, and Jerusalem is one of the issues. And I also remember very well that the very ill preparation for Camp David under Clinton, where President Clinton has allowed Yasser Arafat to make 3 phone calls. One to King of Jordan, the other to President of Egypt, and the third to King of Saudi Arabia. And the 3 of them never accepted, in the same way that Arafat never accepted, the formula that was put in Camp David by Ehud Barak, your prime minister, in which he wanted some sort of shared sovereignty over the ground and underground. And I think it is to do with the American presidents who do not understand or who do underestimate the importance and value of Jerusalem for the Palestinians. The issue for us, Mr. Amirav, is not religion. The issue for us is religion as part of a total paradigm in which Jerusalem is an important component of the political entity of the Palestinian people. To follow on the model that you have presented to us, the model of Rome, Jerusalem is a political entity for the Palestinians. Jerusalem is an occupied city. And therefore, the religious aspirations of whoever does not legitimate the occupation of the city. In the same way that the religious aspirations of Latin American Christian Catholics to do with the Vatican does not allow a Latin American country to go and invade the Vatican under any circumstances under the justification of religious aspirations. You can pray. The Palestinians were ready to open, and I negotiated with Tsevi Livni and Molcho, and we were talking about this fact that one has to recognize that the city was occupied in '67. One. The other important issue is that, of course, there isn't any solution for Jerusalem, because in the same way that you need to solve Jerusalem, you need to solve the issue of borders, refugees, and so on. It was proposed and suggested by Secretary John Kerry, which was totally rejected by Prime Minister Netanyahu, that we start negotiations with borders. Because if you draw a border of 67 as a border, then the issue of settlements, Jerusalem, and water and all other issues will fit neatly within that sort of border identification and so on. But again, the Israeli government never really accepted a 67 as a border, never accepted Jerusalem to be a occupied city, never accepted the Palestinian territory to be occupied territories, to the extent that certain leaders in Israel, they do come and say this is disputed territory rather than occupied territory. So I think the issue has to be looked at in totality rather than, of course, the issue of discussion is Jerusalem because of what has happened with President Trump and so on and so forth. But I also think that the Israeli society is very shifting to the right. This Israeli society today has totally marginalized the peace camp, if you are one of them, and it has totally marginalized all the left camp that was pro-peace at a certain time. There is a rare commodity in Israel today, people who talk about peace, people who talk about Jerusalem, people who talk about refugees, people who talk about peace. The debate in Israel today is about annexation or unilateralism. This is the focus of debate today in Israel, whether we annex all of the West Bank or we take unilateral measures. And I think that is really the most important part of the reason why even I will assure you that with our total rejection of the Trump initiative, whatever it's going to be called, I assure you that Netanyahu doesn't accept it. Because if he thinks he can get 100%, why should he accept 90% or 95%? So that is where I think the paradigm is. My last point, Madam Chair, has to do with Dimitris, who is a good friend of mine. Dimitri, look, the whole of the European issue of Palestine, we always wanted a European envoy to be in the negotiating room. The Israelis never allowed, from Miguel Maratinos to whoever, Valentini, who is now representing the European Union, to the peace process. The problem with Europe is that you have always been Israeli-centric. You were always focusing on Israel. What pleases Israel, what doesn't please Israel. When you chaired the Redwick Regional Economic Working Group in the multilateral talks, you accepted to sit in the back seat. You never wanted to sit in the front seat. You never wanted to be in the driving seat. And you have accepted. And when John Kerry told your ministers in Brussels, "Shh, please don't make any statements, we are making progress," all your ministers of foreign affairs, they accepted. They never shared with you anything. Palestine is part of the geopolitics of the Mediterranean. We're part of your security. Yesterday, your ministers were discussing the influx of refugees and immigration and so on and so forth. It has to do all with us. And therefore, the security of us is part of your security. Now, I think also it's not that Europe has accepted to pay the check. Thank you very much for your assistance to the Palestinians. But also, I think there has to be a serious paradigm shift in which you continue to accept to be the check payer, but you also never taken any serious measure in the direction of stop your assistance or neighborhood association with Israel at a time when Israel was the main cause and reason behind the total collapse and impasse of the peace process, which you never did undertake any measures into this direction. So therefore we never lost an opportunity. It's a big fool to claim that the Palestinians don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Where is the opportunity? I negotiated personally with Saeb Erekat, my friend, 47 rounds with John Kerry. We were never offered anything. What was the offer in Camp David? It was not there. The Palestinians are keen to reach a peace agreement. We never lost an opportunity. We will not lose an opportunity. But Dimitri, there is no offer on the table.
Thank you, Minister. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Bishop Munib Yunan. I come from Jerusalem, but at the same time, I represent here the World Council of Churches, and I bring you greeting from Reverend Dr. Ula Fixit-White, who is the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. I am myself an Arab Palestinian Christian Evangelical Lutheran. I am also a Palestinian refugee who still carries an UNRWA ID. I myself, have lived all my life in Jerusalem. I would like really to give me 5 minutes to explain the role of the position of heads of churches in Jerusalem and World Council of Churches on the issue of Jerusalem. The heads of churches in Jerusalem have written 2 papers expressing their positions on Jerusalem. The first was in 1994 and the second in 2006. Both of them has the same line of position. The position of the heads of churches in Jerusalem was fully adopted by the World Council of Churches, by their 350 churches, and by the 22 Christian global communions in the world, including the Lutheran World Federation. In which we say God chose to speak to humanity and to reconcile peoples with himself and among themselves in Jerusalem. We raise our voices to say that the paths followed until now have not brought about the pacification of the city and have not assured normal life for her genuine and original inhabitants. Therefore, they must be changed. The political leaders must search for a vision as well as for new means. The future of the city must be decided by common agreement through collaboration and consultation, and not imposed by power and force. Unilateral decisions or imposed solutions will continue to be very detrimental to peace and security. This is the reason the international legitimacy on Jerusalem must be fully respected and implemented. All the heads of churches, that means Catholics, Orthodox, all kinds of Orthodox, Anglicans and Lutherans, World Council of Churches, and the 22 World Confessional Communions reject any apocalyptic, eschatological, or biblistic scenarios that the so-called evangelical groups in the world are supporting. They do not represent the Christians in Jerusalem, nor the Christians in the whole Middle East. These people are really harming the body of Christ in Jerusalem. The churches in Jerusalem wrote a letter on the 6th of December to President Trump opposing the move of the embassy, and we were fully supported by all USA mainline churches who wrote to the White House protesting and saying that East Jerusalem, including and the whole West Bank, are occupied territories, and you cannot do what you have done. This is the reason lasting peace in the Middle East is contingent upon the birth of peaceful coexistence between peoples in Jerusalem, the holy city, the heritage of humanity, now a city of two peoples and three religions. The best solution is for Jerusalem to be shared by two sovereign countries, Palestine and Israel, and three religions. Jerusalem can and should be the capital to both nations. Jerusalem has a unique character that distinguishes it from all the other cities of the world, a character which surpasses any local political sovereignty. As the patriarchs and heads of churches wrote, Jerusalem is too precious to be dependent solely on municipal or national political authorities. Jerusalem people are the guardians of her sanctity and carry a double responsibility: to organize their lives in the city and to welcome all pilgrims who come from all around the world. The needed international collaboration is not meant to replace the role and the sovereignty of her peoples. It's rather needed in order to help both peoples to reach the definition and the stability of the special status of the city. This is why, concretely and from political, economic, and social point of view, her peoples must bestow on Jerusalem a special status that corresponds to her double character, holy and universal, ordinary and local, where daily life unfolds. Once this city has been found and defined, the international community is required to confirm it with international guarantees that will assure continuing peace and respect for all. The components of this special status must include the following elements. A, the human right of freedom of worship and of conscience for all, both as individuals and as religious communities. B, equality of all her inhabitants before the law in coordination with international resolutions. C, free access to Jerusalem for all citizens, residents, or pilgrims at all times, whether in peace or in war. In this way, Jerusalem should be an open city and free access to every worshipper. This is the reason Jerusalem, the churches in Jerusalem believe that Jerusalem must be shared, city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, Palestinians, and Israelis alike. The historical status quo of Jerusalem must be maintained and respected. I will explain it later. The custodianship of the Christian and Muslim holy places must continue to be under the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, King Abdullah II ibn Hussein, which is an agreement between President Mahmoud Abbas as well and the King of Jordan on the 31st of May 2013. Since 1994, the heads of churches, of local churches, have proclaimed that the rights of property ownership, custody, and worship which the different churches have acquired through history should continue to be retained by the same communities. These rights, which are already protected in the status quo of the holy places, according to historical firmans and other documents, should continue to be recognized and respected. This is the reason we, the churches, closed the Holy Sepulchre for 3 days, because they imposed unjustified taxes on the churches against all international agreements and the status quo. And last Monday, the three patriarchs wrote to Prime Minister Netanyahu, protesting against all measures taken by enforcing taxes or by the law of the 26th of July, that they can have easy access on Christian property in Jerusalem. We will continue to protest on these issues. I think peace in the city of Jerusalem cannot come from one party alone. Muslims, Christians, and Jews, Palestinians and Israelis must collaborate toward an agreement based on mutual respect and open dialogue. This is a peace that is imposed on people at gunpoint. It is no peace at all. but merely a charade. A city divided by walls of concrete and fear cannot possibly be called a united city. Sovereignty over the city can and should be shared with equal access to both Palestinians and Israelis. Two separate sovereignties for two distinct peoples is also a possibility, as long as these peoples share equal regard for the dignity and the sovereignty of the other in order to reach a true unity of hearts in the two parts of the city. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If there is to be peace based on justice in the Middle East, the churches believe it must start in Jerusalem and spread to the furthest reaches of the Holy Land and beyond. There will be no peace in the Middle East without peace in Jerusalem. This is the reason the heads of churches and world councils believe, and Christians, we believe, that Jerusalem today is a key for war or for peace based on justice. We opt to have it as a key for peace based on justice. Madam Chair, these are, in short, the position of the Christian churches, and please understand, we have nothing to do with those evangelistic groups that are harming the Christian presence and harming all the Christian presence in the Arab world because of their hallucinated scenarios, which are not really touching the hearts of the local people of the Palestinians and Palestinian Christians in Jerusalem. Thank you for hearing me. I'm sorry if I have been long.
I send the representative of the World Council of Church for his statement, and I will now give the floor to the lady. But after I will give the floor to you, ma'am. I will also give the floor to two more speakers, the ambassador of Indonesia and Palestine, that have asked for the floor, and then I will be back to the speakers in order to comment and provide answer and general comments on what has been said after their presentation. Please, ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairwoman. I'm Randa Signora, the director of the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling, a Jerusalemite in the field of human rights for the past 30 years. And maybe I will try to be very brief. I want first to thank all three speakers for their very enriching and insightful presentations, which I highly appreciate. I would like to say that the key issue for this theme, for this session, is to look at international law and legal obligations of the international community. We want to start from there, because when you speak about Jerusalem or the occupied Palestinian territory, we're talking about a situation where international law has been undermined. It has not been the priority. Although the speakers have highlighted, especially Mr. Ziad, Abuzayyad, has highlighted the importance of UN resolutions and the body of international law, specifically human rights law, in addition to international humanitarian law, I believe strongly that all through the process of negotiations, I'm speaking in front of politicians, and I'm sure that many of you would think that I'm maybe a dreamer, because I think that if we set forth international human rights standards and understand what the international community have agreed upon by the international body of the United Nations and by the state parties to the 4 Geneva Conventions, there are legal obligations that have been always undermined. If we look at Common Article 1 of the 4 Geneva Conventions, they all speak about respect and ensure respect. So whenever we speak about the Israeli occupation and the body of international law, we should not only think that this is Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I fully agree with you, Mr. Ziad. We have to look at it as a holistic issue that has to do between those who are being oppressed, occupied, and those who are being the oppressors and the occupied. Mr. Moshe, you have not even mentioned at any point when you were speaking. I appreciate the stories you shared with us, but when we speak about this is not individual relations or people who are advisors. These are politicians that have always undermined the importance of international law. You could agree with Mr. Faisal Husseini, you could agree with anybody, but their the final issue is that we're not talking about only Jerusalem. And I fully agree that it is the core and the crux of everything. And it's one of the issues that have been by chance, postponed to the final status negotiations. But even if we go back to Oslo, Oslo has not given attention to human rights and international law, and experiences in other countries have shown that only if you set forth international human rights standards, and which the international community have agreed upon, we can speak about real peace and a durable solution to the conflict. We're talking here in a context of the UN Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. I think sometimes it's very important to bring in the voice of all state parties to the United Nations and to the state parties to the 4 Geneva Convention, International Humanitarian Law, that unless you set this forth and not only give it lip service, we're not going to go very far. And that's why maybe people like us, I come from a women's organization, human rights organization. I see also the daily sufferings of Palestinian women living under occupation. We really think that it's only if we are part of the decision making, it's not only 2 persons agreeing, it's not only men making politics, we need to bring in women also, their perspective to peace and security, human security, which is lacking all the time, in order to address those very important issues in front of us. Of course, we have no body to negotiate with now or to speak with, but as early as the Oslo Accords, I was then just starting my career in human rights. I looked into the right to Palestinian people to self-determination, economic, social, cultural, and civil and political. And in the study we did at the time, I was still starting my career at Al-Haq, a human rights organization. We reached the conclusion that the Oslo Accords have undermined human rights issues and has not set them forth on the forefront of the agenda. Unless the politicians understand what we're saying, all on both parties, and the international community take their legal obligations under international law, and here comes the role of EU as well. EU is a good organization in supporting us. We don't want you to be a checkbook. I always used to say that in Brussels. We don't want the EU to be a checkbook. We want you, maybe, of course, we appreciate that and we support that, but unless you stand up to the culture, I mean, your own culture, your own principles of international of human rights, the association agreement, which says that any kind of agreements with anybody should be built on respect to human rights, we will not be going anywhere. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry if I took more than I should.
I thank you. And I now give the floor to Ambassador Jani from Indonesia, the permanent representative of Indonesia to the UN and one of the vice chairs of the committee. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. May I speak on my own personal behalf, not as ambassador, but as a human being? First of all, maybe I did the right thing in picking to be moderator in the first plenary and not this one, which is much more difficult, Anna. Thanks God you are the moderator. The first point, just to remind colleagues once again that the issue is, this plenary 2 is on the question of legalities. And I think this has been clearly alluded to by the first speaker, Mr. Ziad Abuzayyad. I think there's no question of it. The question of the legality of Jerusalem, there's so many resolutions already there. There's clear violation of that UN Security Council resolution. If one set up embassies in Jerusalem, it's in contrary to the UN Security Council resolution. So I'm not going to discuss that. That's quite clear. But I just want to ask a question, a simple question, and I'm talking as on a personal capacity. Coming from a country that is the largest Muslim population in the world, Indonesia, but we are not a Muslim country. We are a secular country. I personally come from one religion. I have 4 religions in my family. 4, I am Muslim, I have a Catholic aunt, I have a Protestant uncle, I have a Hindu cousin. So my question would be a simple question. How can you separate this issue? And I have heard the first speaker on this issue of religion. Are we able to dissect this issue of religion? I mean, the three religion in that old town of what, 1 kilometer? Are we able to separate it from this whole discussion and then really focus at that particular 1 kilometer square where you have the temple, the Mount Temple, you have the mosque, you have all those three religions holy site as an open city, and discuss the other part of Jerusalem as another political solution coming up through that. This is an important question before. I'm sorry if my question is a bit naive, coming from someone which is not from the Middle East and looking at it from a different perspective, because many countries are looking at it religion part, depending on which religion you come in. Muslim countries are looking at it as a religion part, for instance, and Latin America are looking at it as Christian type of an approach, and others also doing the same thing. Is it possible to have that type of discussion? This is once again, excuse me if I'm a bit naive on this, because I'm also looking at your point, Mr. Moshe, on the page 7, where you referred to on the 5th objective was to separate the issue of the holy places from the Israeli-Palestinian struggle. You mentioned there that most leaders of the Zionist movement, starting with Theodor Herzl through David Ben-Gurion, the Israel Prime Minister, preferred that Israel capital not be Jerusalem. Is it really the fact of life? I mean, if that is the case, then why should we move the whole thing to Jerusalem? Because this is in contrary to what is really happening nowadays. So if Jerusalem is not supposed to be the Israeli capital, then you can find other capital and leave the capital of Jerusalem to the Palestine. Once again, I'm very naive. This question is very naive because you stated there. And if that is the case, why does the Knesset was set up in Jerusalem? You set up parliament usually in your capital. Mostly in every capital. There's a few countries that are not doing that. But usually that is the government, whether it's the legislative, the judicative, the executive, is very put in the capital of a particular country. So let me be naive on that.
Mr. Moshe.
Most young Israelis will prefer New York as the capital.
Yes, I would also prefer.
Please.
And my question is to my colleagues from Dimitris. I'm not going to go to the politics of everything, but my simple question is, if the Europeans really want to help the Palestinian cause, why is it so difficult to recognize Palestine as a state? There's only Sweden, if I'm not mistaken, and Iceland that has recognized. It's a very simple case. Recognition, voila, c'est simple. You don't have to come up with a checkbook or whatever type of approach. And with that, the process continues. You don't have to be a mediator, for instance, but a simple case of recognition would be a first step. And once again, I'm speaking as Jani, not as the ambassador of Indonesia. This is a very simple and naive question. I'm sorry if I offended anyone, but just wanted to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yanni, my dear friend. Your questions are never naive. And I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Ziad Mansour, the permanent representative of the Observer, the State of Palestine, to the United Nations. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I agree with the concept that when we talk about Jerusalem, this is a very emotional issue. Emotional to everyone, not only to the Palestinians and to the Israelis, to the Jews, but also it is very emotional for all the Arabs, all the Muslims, all the Christians, all the Jews. So then one can see that when you handle this issue, not only in this panel, but also all panels, there is tremendous amount of emotion. And I appreciate, the fact that the three speakers tried to tackle this very complicated issue. Some from sticking very closely to the title of the panel, meaning the legal dimension and the status, which Ziad, I think, did a very good job of dealing with the historical narrative, to the creative or trying to find a way of how to deal with it, as it was described by Mr. Amirav and attributed to things that happened between him and the late Faisal Husseini. Before I dwell on this issue, I just want to make one clarification regarding the European Union. Of course, the European Union can always do more than what they have been doing. But in all fairness, in relation to the question of Jerusalem, the position of the European Union until this moment is sticking to the legal status of Jerusalem, maintaining a unified position regardless of what, defending Security Council Resolution 476 and 478 and 2334, just to mention three key Security Council resolutions that stipulate that any legal changes to the status of Jerusalem is null and void and has no legal ramification, and that is Resolution 476. And also they're sticking and declaring that none of the European countries will move their embassies from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and therefore they're honoring and respecting Resolution 478. And also they are honoring and respecting Resolution 2334, in which it states, even for you, Ziad, beyond and more advanced than Resolution 224, not only sticking to the principle of the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by force, but defining the borders by saying that the borders between the two states is the 4th of June 1967 border, including East Jerusalem as part of the occupied territory, and any changes to these borders will be not accepted unless the two parties, through negotiation, accept to change this line.
This is on my presentation, the full text of the presentation. Okay. You will find this thing.
Okay, if it is there, that's great. But what I'm trying to say with regard to the Europeans, that is their position. That is their unanimous position. The 28 countries of them, and when we say European Union, we're basically talking about most of the West European countries and the number of East European countries. In addition to that, their voting record in the General Assembly and in the Security Council, with regard, for example, to the annual resolution on Jerusalem, they vote unanimously to the content of what I would refer to. With regard to settlements, they vote unanimously that they're being illegal and a major obstacle to peace. And with regard to all other political resolutions, including the applicability of the 4 Geneva Convention to the occupied territories, they vote, including Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem, they vote unanimously in favor of all these resolutions. So we do not have, with all honesty, problems with the European Union and the European countries in terms of their clear position on the fundamental and the legal aspects of the question of Palestine, including Jerusalem. Of course, one can say there's always, you can do more, including, and we negotiate with them. If you believe in the two-state solution, and you do, why don't you invest in peace and moving us closer to the two-state solution by more of you to recognize the state of Palestine? But the fact that some of them, or most of them, with the exception of Sweden and Iceland, have not recognized the state of Palestine, that doesn't mean that the European Union is wrong on the fundamentals. They're not. So I just wanted to clarify that in terms of the position of the European Union. And we work very hard every year through very tenacious negotiation to maintain this very advanced, very principled position of the European Union to remain on the right side. Now, with regard to Jerusalem, the very emotional subject. Of course, one can say that I have a creative idea. I have the silver bullet to resolve an issue. These are ideas one can appreciate. One can praise those who are thinking in a creative way with these ideas. But for us, the Palestinian people, we learned the hard way that while creative ideas are beautiful and wonderful, there is nothing stronger than sticking to international law and to the law and to what the international community has decided. Because if you stick to that, you are on the right side of history and you have almost the entire international community with you, because those who invented international law from all of its dimensions, including international humanitarian law, are the West, specifically the Europeans. And if we stick to what they have invented, then we are defending our cause in the best possible way, because it is in line with international law, including UN resolutions, because they become part of international law. Now, I say that because the Zionist movement were more advanced than us in utilizing these tools in accomplishing the objective of building the State of Israel. The Zionist movement came from nowhere, and on the shoulders of the British colonial power, and with the Balfour Declaration and the mandate to start having immigration coming to Palestine to create the material base for their state. Through that process, the Zionist movement and the international community, whether justly or not justly, created part of international law of saying the conditions that existed in Palestine in 1947 cannot be resolved except through the formula of Resolution 181. That was the decision of the international community. For us, the Palestinian people, we felt that was unfair to us because we owned most of the land in excess of 90%, and we had almost 70% of the population. So we felt that we've been cheated. England did not give us independence, regardless of the composition of the people in our country, Palestine, meaning Jews, Christians, Muslims. We were hoping that we will have independence, and then we will deal with our issues internally, including Jerusalem. Of course, unfortunately, the international community did not decide in that direction. However, the international community, realizing the importance of Jerusalem, did not allow either state to have sovereignty over Jerusalem. And that's why they gave it corpus separatum, meaning to be put under international administration. And that was the decision of the international community. And then war took place. The two states were not created. One state and the remaining part of Palestine were either added to Jordan or Egypt, and Jerusalem was divided as a result of the war, and part of it was part of Jordan, the other part was West Jerusalem. So that reality remained until 1967. In 1967, the remaining part of Palestine was occupied. Here again, international law gave us the first resolution, which is 242, which the essence of it, the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by force and exchanging land for peace, meaning that Israel has to withdraw from the area that it occupied in exchange of peace with Jordan, with the Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, and other countries that had land that was occupied by them. From after 1967, we started changing as Palestinians and realizing the power of international law. We accepted the two-state solution. This time, we accepted the two-state solution, accepting less than half of what was available to us in Resolution 181. But regardless of that, it was obvious that we accepted the principle of the two-state solution. With the two-state solution, East Jerusalem is occupied. Now, for us, the problem in all the negotiations that we had, including the Madrid negotiation, the Oslo negotiation, the Camp David II negotiation, the Annapolis negotiation, all the negotiations that my brother Muhammad Shtay referred to, the sessions with the different administration with the United States. The Israeli government, they wanted to give an interpretation of the reality in Palestine to what we tried to do before 1947 without success, thinking that they can take all of Palestine this time themselves, including all of Jerusalem, and to find arrangement for us, arrangement as maybe centers of populations, if they can be expelled, reviewing mistakes that they made in 1948 by keeping 150,000 Palestinians who are now 1.5 million inside Israel, and all these issues. Without Israel matching our evolution to accept the two-state solution, which means accepting to withdraw from the areas that they occupied in 1967, nothing can be resolved. And personally, I was against the Oslo Agreement and I resigned from my public post because my position was similar to the position of the late Haidar Abd al-Shafi and Edward Said. In the negotiation with Oslo, we did not make it crystal clear that Israel is an occupying power and they have to withdraw from all the areas that they occupied in 67. Therefore, the negotiation would be on ending the occupation. And the other part is to freeze all settlement activities, because it doesn't make sense to negotiate with them while they are building settlements and creating, a new reality on the ground. But be that as it may, with all these negotiations, until now, Israel is refusing to accept that they are an occupying power. If they are not accepting an occupying power, then they're not going to accept to negotiate with us the end of occupation, including East Jerusalem. And we accepted through the arrangement of Oslo with them that one of the subjects that we will defer it to the final status negotiation is Jerusalem, because we realize that it's not only the borders in which we decide the border between our state and theirs, but also we need to decide on Jerusalem. Significant part of the border negotiation will resolve many things related to Jerusalem. But when we say that Jerusalem is a final status issue, because we know the complexity of the 1 kilometer square. And therefore, from our side, and even from the Israelis, they said they accepted, as a result of Oslo, we will defer that to a final status negotiation. The new complications today is Mr. Trump sabotaged all these legal bases, from 181 through 2334 to negating 476, 478, all the traditions, and the 2 pages for those of you who are interested that were included in the ruling of the ICJ on the wall, because there are 2 pages related to the question of Jerusalem. So I think with regard to Jerusalem, we can debate many things. I think let's stick to international law, including UN resolutions, and let's expedite or increase our pressure on the Israeli side to accept to negotiate the end of occupation. And I think one of the speakers in the morning, I think, emphasized the importance of ending occupation, because that is the key to possibly implement the essence of 181, of having 2 states living side by side in peace and harmony. And that will be the material base that we need in order to create new relationship between us and Israel and between the two people. If we are equal, living in two independent states, then our relationship will be different. As long as we are under occupation, there are occupiers and people living under occupation, and therefore that is not a recipe for peace, that is a recipe for the perpetuation of the conflict. I'm sorry for being long, but it is turning into legal, academic discussion. I think it is a useful discussion, but yet our task is to have all the muscles that we can have, and we have a lot of it in the international community, on our side, on the side of international law, on the side of justice, and we are not going this time to throw it away. We learned the difficult way. It is the time for the Israelis to learn that there is no way except that way, and once they accept that for the sake of peace, we will be very close to peace, including regarding the issue of Jerusalem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the discussion is indeed very interesting because the topic is very important, and I propose to skip the break, the coffee break. Yeah, you have taught that you have to remain seated, be disciplined, and be there, okay? We have a reception at 6:15, and we have an extraordinary lunch, then we don't need a break. Because I think it's very useful to continue the discussions and to give the floor now to our panelists, to our speaker. Please be as short as possible. In order to allow to other speakers, I have also in my list the representative of Brazil that would like to make a statement to our audience, and there are some other here. But I will give now the floor to the panelists because many useful comments has been made from the audience, and I will now provide them the opportunity to respond. Please.
Thank you very much. I will try first to respond to the question about how to separate between religion and this discussion, or between religion and the conflict. As a matter of fact, the problem is that the Zionist movement exploited religion to invent a nationality. And they say that Judaism or Jews are a nationality. But if you want to become a Jew, you do not apply for citizenship, but you have to go first of all to the Rabbanut, to the clergy people, and you have to do what is called Giyur, and you have to study the Jewish religion and do all the demands of the Jewish religion. And finally, when the rabbi believe that you are already mentally washed and became a Jew, then he put you in a pool to wash you from being non-Jew and bring you to become a Jew. So the way to become a citizen, it goes through the religion, and it doesn't go through any administrative secular procedure. It's a very, very contradictory people and very contradictory regime that when you speak with them, they say we are a secular state. But when you look on the procedures, how to become a Jew, then you discover that it is embedded in the religion. It's actually what they call it a Khomeini state. It's a religious state. It's a theology state claiming itself that it is secular. And saying that Jews are a nationality. And it's for me and for many Palestinians, we cannot understand how a Russian comes to Israel, automatically he becomes a citizen because he is Jewish. And myself, a Palestinian, whom I have documents proving my roots in Jerusalem back to 700 years, now I'm not allowed to enter Jerusalem. So those who brought the religion to the conflict are actually the Zionist movement itself. And now, and as I think Muhammad Ishtaya said, there is a very sharp shift within the Israeli society that it's becoming more fanatic, more right-wing, and more religious. And actually, what is pushing us as Palestinians, what is pushing us to the religious square is the religious Jews, is the fanatic religious Jews who are inciting our religious people that it's only if you become religious. And I hear it very much from, I speak with you, listen, we cannot confront with these fanatic Jews unless we become fanatic Muslims. And my friend Danny Sietman spoke very eloquently this morning about what's happening in Haram al-Sharif and about the systematic increase of Jews coming to demonstrate their presence inside Al-Haram al-Sharif. And you may be surprised that many of those Jews, if not most of them, are not religious. The national fanatics who use religion to demonstrate their presence inside the mosque. I know some religious Jews. I was speaking with one rabbi lately from Yahudut HaTorah. He told me, as a Jew, I'm not allowed to push my fingers between the stones of the Wailing Wall because my religion doesn't allow me to go to the Haram al-Sharif, to what he called the Temple Mount. So these fanatics are using the religion for political purposes, and they are inciting our religious people and pushing them towards the religion. And the fear is that we may find ourselves converting this conflict from being a conflict between a national movement to a conflict between two religions. And if you speak about two religions and you remember the figures of the Muslims and the Christians in the world and the number of the Jews, you will be scared. You know, we have 2 million Christians, 1.8 billion Muslims, and 14 million Jews. And these 14 million Jews are waging war against 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. But to conclude at this point, it's they who are pushing us with this thing. And I am, as a nationalist, as someone who belongs to the Palestinian national movement, I feel scared that one day this will come out of my hands. It will become a confrontation between Jews and Muslims. And then an Afghanistani or Algerian or anyone else will come and tell me, this is not your responsibility. This is a religious war. I want to fight for Islam. This is my answer to your question. To my friend Dimitris about the European role, you know what they say in Hebrew? They say, Ba'ala mi'ahu ba'ala di'a, which means that the one who has the 100 is the one who should dictate his opinion, which means the one who has the money is the one who should impose his position. You are not using the second part of this Jewish Hebrew saying. You are doing the first one. And in this case, I'm very sorry to say that you are, until now, you are subsidizing the Israeli occupation. If you do not understand what you are doing and you try to make use of the money you are paying in order to bring the Israelis to the table and to peace and to end your burden of paying money for the Palestinian Authority, you will continue subsidizing the Israeli occupation. Three final points to Moshe. Moshe, you are underestimating the conflict when you speak about the stupidity of Palestinians and Israelis. It's not stupidity. We are not stupid. The problem, our problem is your ideology. It's an expansionist ideology which denies the existence of the other. You do not recognize us. You know, there are many people in the world who thought all the time that Shimon Peres, for example, that he is a man of peace. And recently, a month ago, Avi Gil, who was the general director of Shimon Peres' office for all his life, you know, his new book, and he wrote in his book that Shimon Peres had never, ever supported the idea of a Palestinian state, and that he did all what he can in order to undermine the possibility of the creation of a Palestinian state. So our problem is not something stupid. We are confronting with a strange, racist, I would say also a fascist ideology, which doesn't recognize the existence of the other, and it's not new. You know the poem of Naomi Shemer when she spoke about Jerusalem in her poem, and he said, when the kikar is reka, which means that the center of the city is empty, and the center of the city was full with Arabs. But for them, we are not there. We're not existing. It's only they, the Jews, who exist. And it's all because we are goyim. What's goyim? I don't want to go with you to this discussion and to this debate, but I'm forced and was brought to it. It's not stupidity. My second point, you say Chairman Arafat. Why don't you say President Arafat? Why now in 2018 you refer to Arafat as Chairman Arafat? And my final comment, you said that the Palestinians were nothing before Arafat, and they would have remained under the Jordanian regime. I want to tell you that the Jordanians who were living under the Jordanian regime, they were only 1/3 of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian, 2/3 of the Palestinian people were outside the West Bank. And the Palestinian national movement started in the early 50s, and it continued, and the Palestinian people continued to be something, and they had never been nothing. Thank you very much.
I thank you. I will now pass the floor to Dimitris, that although you insist that you are academic, you are not representing the EU or you are town and government Greece, the question that has posed to you.
If you allow me, Mr. Chair, just, I forgot to say. Yeah, I just forgot. Madam Chair, I'm really sorry. I'm so much excited. To Dr. Mansour about the resolution 2334, I have in my paper, the Council reiterated its demand that Israel immediately and completely cease all settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. The resolution underlines that the Security Council will not recognize any change to the 4th of June 1967 lines, including with regard to Jerusalem. Thank you. I just want to tell you that it's there in my presentation, but I was reading selective paragraphs because the chairwoman intimidated me from the very beginning when she said that I will stop anyone beyond 7 minutes. So I was running all the time to finish before she stopped me.
Have you realized that I have not been successful at all? Not even only with the panelists, but with the audience, because you have all of you made a very long explanation, but they have been very useful, and you have provided a lot of elements for our discussion. Then Dimitris, in your own capacity as academic, please answer this question that has posed to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all the questions and comments. I wanted to start with the order that those were posed, but my friend and His Excellency Mohammed Stageh is not here. I cannot see him. But there were a lot of common points which were raised. And I'm very glad I started with a disclaimer that I'm not here to represent the EU. And I guess you will be happy to know that I do agree with a lot of the criticism raised, because it is a criticism which I myself raise on my everyday work and with regard to the EU. The argument that the EU is a payer and not a player is a very well-known argument. I think all of us know it. And I would argue that to a certain extent it is true. I know, I'm talking to Palestinians, I know that they would like the EU to get a stronger role, but if we're to be realistic, the EU has never been willing to take a leading role. The whole process, which a lot of you call peace process, I call it a zombie process probably, has been based on US dominance. And the EU has accepted this from the beginning. So the EU never wanted to take an active role on this conflict. Despite this, the EU has taken the role of a riding shotgun. And in case you are not aware of with what this is, in the stagecoach era, the shotgun messenger would be the person sitting next to the driver and protecting the cargo from bandits. It's like a co-pilot, if you want to put it on aviation terms. The same is also it can be argued for the World Rally Championship funds. There is a co-driver, and the co-driver is as important as a driver, especially in particular moments. So the point I want to make here about the EU's role is that it never wanted to take a leading role, but we shouldn't underestimate the co-pilot or co-driver role which the EU has taken. The EU still sees a green line, and I would argue that there are a lot of other international actors who have forgotten about the green line. But the EU is still there, insisting with the so-called declaratory diplomacy, talking about settlements, having a very clear positions about settlements, having or trying to adopt very clear policies with regard to the settlements. So I don't believe that I end up defending the EU, but I'm just trying to say that if we see it from a decade-to-decade perspective, we see that the EU has helped as a co-pilot or a co-driver. With regard to the point raised about the association agreement between the EU and Israel, officially, there has not been an upgrade in the bilateral relations since the Gaza war in 2008-2009. So officially, there is a freeze in the negotiations and in the upgrade of the bilateral relationship. Now, what happens is in practice is a different story, but officially there is no upgrade in the bilateral relationships. Another thing which people sometimes don't see, the EU is more divided than ever internally. You see what happens with Brexit, for example. It is the first time that we witness the disintegration of the EU. And all these divides reflect on the external policies of the EU as well. The EU has never been able to adopt a common position when it comes to the conflict. There has always been tensions there, but despite this, some things have been achieved. I would argue that the EU has managed to feed the international community with different ideas, and I would agree with you that when it comes to the UN, there are certain similarities there. And even if we see Resolution 2334, if you see the resolution, the actual text, a lot of the actual text, it just appears as if it's a copy-paste from some of the EU declarations. Not all of it, of course, but some of it. So, and the same goes also true, for example, in 2010, with the Quartet statement. If you look at the Quartet statement of 2010, again, it looks like a copy-paste of the 2009 EU conclusions. As I mentioned to you, another disclaimer which I did in the beginning is that I'm not a lawyer. I do believe in the power of international law, but it was raised by a lot of you, and I have doubts, especially when we look in this particular case of Palestine. As you have pointed out, every single law has not been respected. So why shall we keep on having faith in law? And this is a response to your question. Why shall we really, in this era of Mr. Trump, why the EU should not come up creating its own facts on the ground and recognize the state of Palestine? And actually, you probably didn't see it. It's printed in the entrance. This is the argument I have tried to do with my colleague Daniela Huber on imposing Middle East peace, why EU member states should recognize the state of Palestine. So I'm glad you brought it forward. There are already 8 EU member states which have already recognized Palestine in a different era, 1988 mainly. And we have 20 EU member states which haven't done so. Now, talking to EU officials, the response they give you is that we keep the recognition, because recognition is something you can do only once. So they keep it as a probably a card to be played. And also the official position of the EU is that there should be an agreement between the parties, the Israelis and the Palestinians. So this is the reason, at least talking to some of the EU officials, why they don't go forward in recognizing the state of Palestine. I think with regard to the EU embassies, to the EU countries moving their embassies to Jerusalem, the EU has had a very strong response to what was happening after the decision, the American decision of the US administration to move the embassy, and the EU has resisted. And there have been a lot of declarations, a lot of statements by Mrs. Mogherini herself. I'm not sure I share your optimism. I think, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, the thing is cracking. I hope that it will not happen, but I would personally expect that there will be some EU member states which will do this move. I hope it will not happen, but let's see what happens with that. And I think I'll leave it here. I hope I covered all of the questions and comments, but if not, I'll be happy to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitris. Then Mr. Amirav.
Yeah, thank you. I try to teach my students to look backward in the past and have a kind of to analyze what went wrong with us Israelis since the beginning of the century, since 1948. And it is very important for us Israelis to understand what went wrong. And you know, Israelis, if you ask them, they say, nothing went wrong. It's all the Palestinians. If not the Palestinians, it could be heaven here. So this is, of course, the main attitude I will suggest to the Palestinians. It's not for me to tell you, but it's for you to tell me what went wrong. After 100 years of conflict, and let me remind you, our conflict, I mean yours and mine, is the oldest conflict in the world. So do you ask yourself what went wrong? I'm asking it. I'm asking the Israelis. And let me tell you, we had many mistakes. Some of them I saw in my own eyes. I mean, I was there. Speaking in Annapolis with the Prime Minister, speaking with Shamir, when Shamir was Prime Minister. So many mistakes we Israelis did. So it's important for us to recognize these mistakes. But it is the past. It's not important anymore. It reminds me, you know, the meetings I had with Professor Edward Said, a very good friend of mine. Amazing man and scholar. And he was sitting with me in Jerusalem, and we were discussing who was first here, you or us Palestinians? And I said, of course, we read the Bible. He said, no, we are the Canaanites. So we were before you. And I say, Professor, this is what we are going to argue now. Who was first here? And he said, yes, but it is important. Is it really important? Bullshit. It's not important. So what is important is if we can study the failures, we Palestinians or we Israelis, what happened in the last 20, 30 years that we were part of it. I mean, I see people here who were part of the process. What went wrong? How come we are now with a situation in which Jerusalem, which is the key, we couldn't come to a kind of a formula until this very moment? How come? 30 years ago, I came to a formula with Faisal Husseini. So you say, big deal, Faisal Husseini and Professor Amirav, big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big deal, let me tell you. I would like to see the Israeli and the Palestinian, I mean, people who has enough courage and prestige, we need it too, to come and say, this is what went wrong, now we are ready to go forward. I don't see these people. I'm not a politician. I'm a professor in the university, but I know the politicians. So when we come back to history, history is not important. Don't bring me back to 48. I can bring you to 67. I can tell you about the Jordanization. I mean, it's bullshit. It's not important. What is important is today. Can we come with a kind of a creative idea? Or we are hesitating? I was speaking in the last few days with Ziad, old friend of mine. We are veterans of the war for peace. I salute him. But we are the old generation.
We are not old.
No, we are young. But where are the new politicians? Where are the new youngsters among the Palestinians who will come with creative ideas? As the two of us and Faisal came then. And the ideas has to do, and to say it openly, what are we going to do with the Hamas in Gaza? Nobody spoke about the Hamas here. I didn't hear the word Hamas. This is the only word that most Israelis speak, you know, when they speak about the conflict. The main thing is Hamas, 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 Hamas. You are all Hamas. All the Palestinians here in this room, you are Hamas, according to the Israelis. So can we speak with the Hamas? Can we come to a kind of agreement with the Hamas? The answer is no. No way. And this is what makes me so pessimistic on one hand. But on the other hand, I try to be very optimistic because of my children and because I believe that we can come not so far. We are very close to peace, first of all, in Jerusalem. And you know, I spoke with some friends, Palestinians, even some of them who, you know, I don't want to mention names, who said, you know, Moshe, we should go on this formula that Abu Mazen and Olmert refused to sign, because maybe it's the only formula. But you ask any Palestinian here if he is ready to sign it, he will say no. If you ask, I mean, there are not many Israelis here, it's me, so you can ask me if I'm ready to sign it, yes, but I'll be the only one who is ready to put it publicly. But this is a solution to the main question of Jerusalem. But we don't touch it. So we have to have a soul search, all of us, Israelis and Palestinians and Americans and Europe. What went wrong? How come that our conflict is the oldest conflict in the world? How come? Is it really so complicated? I think it's very simple. I think it has to do with ego. I think it has to do with fear. Politicians are afraid. All the politicians I know in Israel are afraid. They don't have the guts to say the truth to their people. I think with the Palestinians it's very similar. So be courageous and say the truth and say what is it that you are ready to give to the Israelis. When I speak with Israelis, I ask them, what is it that you are ready to give up on? They say, who? To whom? To the Hamas? Nothing, zero. So if this is the dialogue, I mean, we can be very smart and sitting here with all the resolutions, and the professors can teach in the universities. But when we come to the point, this is the main point. Soul searching. Everybody here, especially the Palestinians here, should give themselves a kind of a report. Why is it that after so many years we cannot reach a solution in Jerusalem? And the solutions are there. Because they are afraid. And when I speak with the Israelis, they're afraid too. So let's take this fear out. Let's be honest. Let's be courageous enough and say it. If you ask me, this is where we are stuck right now. And not all the other, I would say, questions that are very important. But we are speaking about courage. So I hope we will have it, Israelis and Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Amirav. I now will give the floor to the other speakers that have asked for the floor. We have only 25 minutes left, and we have not even taken the break. I really beg you to limit your intervention to 3 minutes now. And I will give the floor, I have you in my list. I will give you the floor to the representative of Brazil that has asked for the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'm the Brazilian ambassador to Morocco, and I'm glad to take this opportunity, first of all, to congratulate the government of Morocco for hosting this very important conference, which helps focus the attention of the international community on an issue that is indeed crucial for the solution of the conflict in Palestine. And I would also like to thank the panelists for the very interesting presentations, both in the afternoon and in the morning. And I would just like very, very briefly to recall what my country's view is on the question of Jerusalem. We are aware, Madam Chairperson, that the question of Jerusalem is indeed a very complex and sensitive one. We are aware also that the importance of the city for both Palestinians and Israelis and for the three monotheistic religions must be duly taken into account in any peace process worthy of its name. A basic principle of Brazil's foreign policy is respect for international law. And it is from this perspective that we look at the question of Jerusalem. Brazil recognized the state of Palestine in 2010, and we remain fully committed to the establishment of a sovereign, economically viable, and territorially contiguous Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. As to the status of the city of Jerusalem, Brazil reiterates its commitment to the UN Charter and Security Council Resolution 478, among others. We have called on all parties to refrain from any unilateral action that could jeopardize the result of negotiations on the final status of the city. In this regard, the Brazilian government understands that the status of Jerusalem will be decided in negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis for the establishment of two states within the boundaries based on the internationally recognized June 1967 lines, and with free access to the holy sites of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, in accordance with UN Security Council and General Assembly resolutions. We think it is regrettable that the Palestinian right to a sovereign and independent state has not yet been fulfilled, more than 70 years after the approval of General Assembly Resolution 181, which, by the way, was adopted under the presidency of a Brazilian who was then the president of the General Assembly. So we think it is regrettable that the Palestinian right has not been fulfilled, and we reiterate, Madam Chairperson, Brazil's long-standing commitment to peace and to the two-state solution. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I sent the ambassador of Brazil to Morocco for his statement, and now I give the floor to you, yes, to the gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Ali Ghaith. I'm from Jerusalem. I would like to just give a small statement with a question to Professor Amirav. You asked one question and you kept asking it, which is, what went wrong? So what went wrong is occupation in 1948 went wrong. Deir Yassin happened. Expulsion of Palestinians who are now refugees and who are dreaming of coming back to their homes. This is what went wrong. And this cannot be reprehended, it cannot be forgotten because it happened. We cannot talk about the aftermath and expect to solve it without thinking about the source of the avalanche that happened. This is our first stepping stone into solving that. But asking what went wrong after it happened, this is wrong. Another point you have raised, which is where are the courageous and the creative people from the Palestinian side? They are there. However, many of them are arrested. Many of them are under Israel's thumb. They cannot speak up. They don't have that privilege. So how can we present new solutions and speak up against the government of Israel, and while having this monster in the back of our heads telling us to shut up and not speak about anything and not do anything about it? I think the anger that is brewing, that has brewed since 48, is now taking another stand, is coming up to the surface. So please, I would appreciate that this question about what went wrong should be answered by you, not us. Thank you.
I thank you, sir. Now I give the floor to you.
Just a comment to Professor Amirav. You mentioned that the two major obstacles to reach a settlement are fear and lack of courage. I think I need to correct you here, and I say that the two obstacles to reaching a settlement are the exclusivity of Zionism and the asymmetry of power between the two sides. Exclusivity of Zionism makes Israel behave as if it has to take all, and with its power it believes it can make it. And with the support of the Britain before 1948 and later the US after that, they believe they can make it. And so far they are in this mindset, and unless they rethink the ideology of the state and rethink what is the meaning of power, I think we are not moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, I have no other speaker asking for the floor. I think that I will be back to the panelists to provide some final comments. Probably now I should revert. I will start with Mr. Amirav, and then Dimitris, and then Ziad. Okay? Please, Amirav.
I teach my students to ask this question. And I'm asking you to ask this question. And the question is very simple. What went wrong in my nation, with my people? How come we are here? And I owe this answer to my children and to my grandchildren. And I am the one who is going to ask. Now, I wrote a lot about it. You will find in your files an article of 10 pages, what went wrong, in which I explain in an academic way, very, very painful for me, how we failed with all the national targets in Jerusalem. Read it. Read it. This is a soul searching I'm doing. And when I write it in Israel, or I'm interview in the newspapers, you know what I speak? I don't speak about how the Palestinians went wrong. I'm saying how we Israelis went wrong. Now, I'm Israeli, but I have to be objective. And there are many things and many mistakes we did. And I'm the one who is presenting it to the Israeli public. I'm the one who is saying it to the Prime Minister when he asks me. And there were Prime Ministers who asked me, and I said, this is wrong, this was wrong. The question is, what about you, Palestinians? Why are you defending your misery and your history by avoiding a soul searching? You should do it if you are a student or academic. You should do it if you are Palestinian. You should do it as a scholar. Everything was okay with the Palestinians. They didn't do anything wrong. It's all the Israelis. Believe me, I hear it every day. We Israelis, nothing was wrong. It's all these Palestinians.
In what language do you want to know our answer what went wrong with us? What language do you want?
In Hebrew. I'll translate it. Ziad will translate it. So say it bravely, what went wrong with you? What happened? I'm waiting for it for many years. Because whenever I meet Palestinians, not for me, it's for you. It's for you. So self-criticism, and you know, if you ask about me in Israel, and there are some who know, I'm criticizing the government all the time. For years, not in the last year. I'm criticizing my government. Because this is the courage of Israel, that we can say, Mr. President or Mr. Netanyahu, this is wrong. And we say it, and we have demonstrations. And we do all this as a free country. I write in the paper how wrong we are with the Palestinians, what wrong is going on in Gaza, all the time. They respect me. I didn't see this self-criticism among the Palestinians. I didn't see it. Maybe you will show me. I'm looking for it for years. Stand up and say. I'm not saying that you have to say it as a kind of against the leader, against the leadership. But you have to do this soul searching. Because if you don't do it and you put everything on us Israelis, you're not going anywhere. Not mentioning academically. Because when I write an article, how we failed in Jerusalem, I read the article, it's in your files. We failed. I researched in Jerusalem all the targets of the governments in the 60s, 70s, and I showed the Israelis that we failed in all of them. I'm not getting into the article now, but please read it, and you will see what does it mean, a search souling. And it's not only in English, it's in Hebrew. And believe me, I'm attacked in Israel for being criticizing the national consensus. And you are afraid to touch the national consensus because we are weak. We are in prison. Don't be afraid, do it the way I do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then Dimitris.
Thank you. I'm not sure I have much to add to this second round, but I think there was a key word which was said, which is asymmetry of power. And I think that this has been the main reason why every single effort to bring a peace plan forward has failed. Because all these plans did not take into consideration the asymmetry of power. They tried to keep a balance between the parties, but as you very correctly mentioned, the two parties are not equal. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, I want to be serious trying to answer the question of Mr. Amirav about what went wrong. And there are many things actually which went wrong on our side. And in the last 2 minutes, I gathered some of them and I will put them in front of you in a telegraphic way because I don't want to take too much time. The first thing which went wrong was in the late 80s when we, the Palestinians, accepted the conditions to announce that we denounce terror And we accepted to put the resistance against the occupation in the category of terror. And this in violation with the Charter of the UN, which gives the right to the people under occupation to resist occupation by all possible means. So our first mistake, which went wrong, is that our acceptance indirectly to call the resistance against the occupation as terror. The second thing which went wrong is that we signed Oslo Accords without demanding from the Israelis to commit themselves to freeze settlement activities in the occupied territories. And I remember that Haidar Abdel Shafi and Zakaria Al-Agha were all the time in Washington telling us that without freezing the settlement activities, we will get nowhere, and this happened. So the mistake of our leadership, who did the Oslo agreement from behind our backs when we were in Washington, is that they accepted to sign the Oslo Accords without making a condition on Israel to freeze settlement activities in the occupied territories. The third thing which went wrong is that we accepted to postpone the issue of Jerusalem to the third year of the interim period, again, without making a condition that Israel will freeze everything in Jerusalem and keep it until we go to the negotiating table to negotiate over Jerusalem. Because the result was, because we did not ask for freezing settlement activities in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, the Israelis entered an intensified process of expanding Jewish settlements, adding Jewish settlers to the occupied territories, that the number of the settlers from at the time of Oslo, while we were negotiating during 10 years, it tripled 3 times. That the Israelis were fooling us. They were sitting with us talking about peace and expanding the settlements and adding more and more settlers. And now we are in a position where there are 700,000 settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. These people are becoming a very influential, important element in the internal Israeli politics. They are becoming a major electoral power, and they succeeded in undermining any possibility of a solution based upon the 2 states solution. So what went wrong is that we allowed this to happen. And now I tell you, I believe deep from my heart that we are behind the time when the 2-state solution were possible. And Moshe knows Amirav knows that I was in the 70s talking about the 2-state solution contrary to the position of the PLO. And was accused of being a traitor because I was speaking about Palestinian 2 states. Unfortunately, after years, they adopted the same position which I was calling about it. Now I tell you that the 2-state solution, is not anymore realistic because of the settlements and the settlers. And this is what went wrong from the side of the Israelis too, because if they really wanted a political solution, a peace solution, they would not have continued adding settlers and settlements inside the occupied territories to undermine any possibility for a solution. And we must admit, Moshe, that we were defeated by the right-wing camp in your country and in your people. They defeated us and they succeeded to kill peace and any chance for peace. This is the third thing. What was the fourth thing which went wrong? What went wrong is that we were naive enough to say that the borders of our state are the 67 lines. And we did not demand the partition resolution. And when we started talking about the state in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, and actually we did not invent this position. It was invented in Sadat's speech in the Knesset when he came to Israel in 78. And we were unconditionally following that point and talking about a Palestinian state in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And the Israelis said, okay, if they are talking about this, we want to bargain with them on this, and we want to share it with them. We should have, from the very beginning, we should have demanded the partition resolution, and this would have maybe at the end brought us to a state in the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. So this is another thing which went wrong. And the last thing which went wrong is that after the Oslo Agreement, the PLO accepted to recognize the state of Israel, but did not ask Israel in return to recognize the state of Palestine. They were satisfied to ask Israel to recognize the PLO. And now we are in a position that we recognize the state of Israel, but they do not recognize the state of Palestine. So this is also another thing which went wrong. And believe me, Moshe, I have a long list of such things which went wrong, and I can talk about them hours. But let's, first of all, accept that the issue is not something went wrong. The issue is that we are sitting on a changing land. The land is changing under our feet, and they are creating facts all the time on the ground, and they are killing any possibility or any chance for a political solution. So unless there will be an international pressure on Israel to change its position and accept the principle of withdrawal, unless the Israelis feel that this occupation is expensive and they are paying the price of their occupation, and this occupation is becoming a burden on Israel, Israel will not think about withdrawal and will not think about peace, and they will not accept anything. And the international pressure on Israel could be political, could be economical, could be by boycotting. There are many ways to make the international community use its influence to make the Israelis change their mind. And you know, and your people always say that if you want to hurt him, beat him on his pocket. And without you being beaten on your pocket, you will not get out from my territory. There must be a price for this occupation. Unfortunately, we are not, until now, able to make the Israelis pay that price. We can make them do it. The international community can make them do it. And if we do it and make them feel that, then again we will go back to the possibility of a two-state solution. But without making them pay the price of the occupation and understand that this occupation cannot be a permanent situation, they will continue in their settlement program and settlement plans. And at the end of the day, no two-state solution. There will be a 10, 15, 20 years of an apartheid regime in the occupied territories, but at the end of the day, there will be only one state, a multinational state, and it will be the end of the Zionist dream, which you are fighting for it. You are laying down the foundations for the end of the Zionist movement and the end of Israel as a Jewish state, and putting us on the tracks of apartheid, which will lead us again to the one-state solution, which we fought for it from the 60s. This was our original position. We wanted a democratic, secular state in Palestine, and the international community and some liberal Israelis convinced my leadership to speak about two-state solution. And when we accepted this and we started talking about two-state solution, they continued working to make a one Jewish state, and they will not succeed in doing that. Sorry for being long, Madam. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you and to the three panelists. The final discussion has been what is wrong or what went wrong. I would say even what has to be right. And I think what the name of the title of this panel is the question of Jerusalem in international law and member states' obligation. It means international community obligation. And what happened as probably, I mean, using the same phrase, what went wrong?
My last intervention was about what the international can do.
Yeah. And I just would say that what went wrong is that the international community has failed to the Palestinian people. And we should continue pushing and pursue what we have collectively agreed. That was what went right. We have a framework in international law including international humanitarian law, human rights law, the Geneva Conventions related to international humanitarian law. We have a set of resolutions, very important resolutions adopted by the UN Security Council from the 181 to the most recently 12334. We have many issues to solve. The issue of Jerusalem is a fundamental part of it. But we have many other issues to solve, which is the settlements, which is the wall, the construction of the wall. We have even a legal opinion by the International Court of Justice. We have about the issue of political prisoners. We have the issues of Palestinian refugees. And we have the framework in international law to do it, that we have collectively decided, not the Israeli and the Palestinian, we collectively decided to do things in order to end the occupation of Palestinians. And this that has been mentioned by different panelists and from the audience, that we are in a very asymmetric situation. Even I say it from the very beginning when I was commenting the interventions of you, Mr. Amirav. We have to see the whole issue in that way. We cannot talk in the same terms and even ask the same questions to the parties in the same way, because they are not in the same position. We are talking about the occupying power and the occupying people and occupying land, and a failure by international community to fulfill their obligation in order to settle definitive solutions. And there are many issues that are behind. If we do not have probably a superpower that allowed to Israel to be where they are and to do the things that they do. For example, what is wrong to declare unilateral Jerusalem as the capital of Israel? That is very wrong, because that was against international law, that goes against UN Charter, and that damage and jeopardize the whole solution, including the two-state solution, which has been the result of many negotiations and many developments on the conflict and on the issue. That what is right, and the only way that is right, and I think has been also told during the debate, is to strictly apply, implement, and stick to international law. International law is there for something, not to violate and not to pay consequence for the violation of international law. Then the international community, we all, an international community is understood by states, but nowadays, it's not only states, it's civil society, academics. We all have to push in order to have the international law implemented and applied. And this is the request, and I think it should be the final message of this panel. We have to strictly apply the international law that we have all collectively decided. That's the only way to have a long-lasting, definitive, and fair solution for the Palestinian issue, and to end the occupation, and to have an independent and sovereign state with the right of self-determination fully implemented by the Palestinian people. Thank you very much for the attendance to this panel, for the active participation. I think has been a very useful discussion. I'm sure it will be part of the report, but the most important is to expand this discussion and to continue pushing and pursuit for the implementation of international law. With that, with those comments, I will conclude our deliberations of plenary 2. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank for your active participation, particularly for the contributions of the panelists to our discussion. Please note that we will resume the conference tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for plenary 3 on Palestinian youth in East Jerusalem. Very important issue, Palestinian youth in East Jerusalem. Followed in the afternoon by plenary 4 on the Palestinian strategy and international community. May I also remind all the participants that you are kindly invited to the reception tonight, hosted jointly by the OIC and the Committee on Palestine on the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. It will be held at, it says here 7 p.m., but I think it's 6:15, just in 10 minutes more. Here at the hotel in the Andalusian Garden, very nice framework. We hope to see you all there, and thank you very much for your active participation. 6:15, in 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you.